Welcome, Frankfort and Franklin County residents, and thank you for tuning in to the Candidate Forum of Justice of the Kentucky Supreme Court, 5th District, General Election, held on November 5th, 2024. I'm J.C. Young, and I'm honored to serve on the Chamber Government Affairs Committee and your moderator for this event. The Supreme Court of Kentucky is the court of last resort and the final interpreter of state law. It consists of 7 justices who are elected from the 7 appellate districts, and they serve 8-year terms. Franklin County is located in the 5th District, which also includes Woodford, Scott, Bourbon, Fayette, Madison, Clark, and Jessamine counties. The justices, as a panel, hear appeals and decisions from the lower courts and issue decisions or opinions on cases. Cases involving the death penalty, life imprisonment, or imprisonment for 20 years or more go directly from the circuit level to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is responsible for establishing rules of practice and procedure for the Court of Justice, which includes the conduct of judges and all attorneys. The positions that these candidates are seeking are highly complex, and they're worthy of candidates such as yourselves. In this candidate forum for Justice of the Kentucky Supreme Court, 5th District, we're honored to have Miss Pamela Goodwine, Miss Erin Izzo. Before we begin, I'd like to thank and recognize the Frankfort Area Chamber of Commerce for establishing this candidate forum and the Frankfort Plant Board for hosting and broadcasting this event. Serving as our esteemed panelists and those doing the real work at this function today are Frankfort Area Chamber of Commerce President and CEO, Ms. Tish Shade, Owner-Operator of Canoe Kentucky and Kentucky River Tours, Mr. Nathan Deppenbrock, and Chair of the Chamber Government Affairs Committee and Frankfort Plant Board Communications Director, Ms. Kathy Lindsay. Candidates, you will have 2 minutes for opening remarks and 2 minutes for closing remarks. You'll have 1-minute responses to questions. We had a draw prior to the forum, and opening remarks will begin with Ms. Izzo. Ms. Izzo, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, JC. And please let me echo his thanks to the Frankfort Chamber as well as the Frankfort Plant Board and Channel 10 for inviting us here to speak. My name is Erin Izzo, and I am running for the Kentucky Supreme Court. A little bit about myself here personally. My husband and I, we live here in Frankfort over on the east side, and so this is a place I've called home since we've moved here from Lexington right in the middle of COVID, July 2020. Professionally speaking, I'm a partner at Landrum & Schaus, where I have litigated for 19 years. I also serve as an arbitrator, and as an arbitrator, I do a lot of the same things that judges do. Attorneys come before me in cases, they argue the evidence, I hear the evidence and render decisions. I listen to witness testimony, and I also preside over trials and render awards. So this is what I bring. This is the experience that I bring here. Often these cases deal with complex issues such as wrongful death, catastrophic injury, and or discrimination cases as well. Litigation-wise, I've represented clients on both sides of the V, both plaintiffs and defendants, in these complex cases for the 19 years. Employment matters, especially with a focus on discrimination, either racial or gender discrimination, has been where make my bread and butter, I suppose I could say. But enough about that. I look forward to serving the people of the Commonwealth and the people of Franklin County here, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Ms. Goodwine, 2 minutes.
Thank you, JC, and thank you to the Frankfort Chamber and the Plant Board for hosting this forum so that our community members can learn about the critical importance of this election. My lifelong goal to serve on the Kentucky Supreme Court has driven by my proven commitment to justice and the power of the law to protect and serve every citizen. I have dedicated my life and career to upholding the principles that are the firm foundation of our legal system. I work hard every day for the people of Kentucky, serving as a judge on the Court of Appeals. I am prepared to put my 25 years' experience as a judge and the utmost in skills, honesty, integrity, ethics, and work ethic, as well as my dedication to justice for all, to work for you on the Kentucky Supreme Court. I am the only candidate for Kentucky's highest court who has ever been a judge. My opponent has never been a judge, although she does say that she's done things that a judge can do. However, I have served as a judge at every level of the judiciary so far, and earning me the utmost skill and experience needed to serve you on the Kentucky Supreme Court. We have seen the impact of judicial decisions, and we find ourselves at a critical juncture where the importance of a highly skilled, fair, and impartial judiciary cannot be overstated. Our courts must be bastions of integrity with practitioners who have the utmost skill and experience ensuring that the rule of law is applied fairly and equitably. That is how I have served every day for 25 years as a judge and how I will serve as a justice. You've heard the counties in which will be on the ballot this fall, and I look forward to serving you as a justice and humbly ask for your vote to ensure that the Kentucky Supreme Court is a beacon of justice for all.
Thank you both for your opening statements. Thank you very much. Great job. Our first question is going to come from Chamber President and CEO, Ms. Tish Shade, and it's going to be directed to you, Ms. Izzo. You're going to have a 1-minute response.
Thank you.
How do you think judges can maintain the public's trust in the court system?
Oh, goodness. All right, wide open question here. Well, one of the foremost things that we need to ensure is that our judges and our justices who are serving us maintain an absolute neutral position on their cases. We want to make sure that the judiciary is completely independent and is free from outside influence. This can be things such as political guarantees or political contributions. It could also be things such as conflict and recusing from cases where there's a conflict issue. So these are things that are important. It's something that I've prided myself throughout my practice here, and I pull off cases if there is a conflict, whether it's through arbitration or with my litigation as well. So I think that's important to our voters, and it's something that I will bring with me to the bench.
Thank you.
Ms. Goodwine, 1 minute.
Thank you. Judicial races are nonpartisan in Kentucky, and it is critical that we maintain that impartiality. It is critical that in every decision that we make as a justice, that we put aside any personal biases or any personal views, regardless of what our opinion may be about the law in which we are interpreting. It is critical that we always set aside partisanship and that we maintain impartiality. I've been a registered independent since I became a judge, and I know that continually displaying a strong work ethic, honesty, integrity to ensure that the cases are decided fairly for all involved. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Mr. Deppenbrock, and it's going to be directed to you, Ms. Goodwine. You'll have 1 minute.
Thank you both for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach to interpreting the law?
Yes. Again, throughout my 25 years as being a judge on the bench, I believe that justice should be applied equally and fairly, and that everyone should have justice applied equally and fairly to them. My approach specifically, when one thinks about judicial philosophy, is one may want to put maybe headings or topics on that, such as, are you an activist? How do you want to define yourself? Some may call themselves an originalist. Some may call themselves a textualist. I like to think that I'm a pragmatist. I like to think about what the pragmatic effect is going to be after looking at a law and determining whether or not it's ambiguous or not. If it's not ambiguous, then I simply apply that law. If it is ambiguous, after looking to the intent of the legislatures, I'll look at the pragmatic effect.
Mrs. O, 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. How I approach the law, and I do this in my arbitrations as well with my practice, as the only candidate who's actually litigated before the appellate courts, either the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, this sort of experience is something that Kentuckians have insisted that their candidates have. When I look at the law, when I'm examining the law, one, I do look for the ambiguity. If there is ambiguity present, if there's not, then it's applied as the terms are read with simple English. If there is ambiguity present there, then statutory interpretation guidelines, you look towards the intent, the legislative intent. And from a philosophical judicial standpoint on this, I consider myself a constitutional originalist. And what that means, and this is the same take for looking at the Constitution versus looking at the actual law at issue. I look to see what was the intent behind it, what did the words mean, what was the legislative intent. Because if you want to truly understand what a law is meant to do, then that's what you need to understand the words as they were written. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Kathy Lindsay. It's going to be directed to you, Ms. Izzo. You're going to have
Great.
1 minute.
Okay, thank you all for being here. Obviously, we're with the Chamber of Commerce. We represent a lot of businesses here in town. So my question focuses on business. How would you balance the need for legal stability with evolving business practices and technologies?
Could you be more clear? Or could you?
Yeah.
That's a very broad question.
Yeah. With we might have new technologies, new businesses that come. Is there any flexibility as we move forward in, I don't know, in just if something comes to you that you've never had before because it's a new business, new technology, how would you handle that situation?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, of course, things always evolve over time. We have new businesses. Of course, right now the influx of AI has happened, and there's
Right.
a big push to really incorporate things like that. What I do, of course, would look at what laws are in place, the legislatures, and how they are examining this particular issue, because how new things are addressed is really a legislative role. Now, in the absence of that, I look at precedent and see what sort of values we have that are established by our precedent, that's legal decisions that are binding, and use that to explore different things. In the context of AI, just for example, concerns that might be there is, okay, is the AI truly self-generating? Is it truly thinking about this? Or is it self-biased because it's influenced and put together by someone with a particular viewpoint? We've seen that in some things in the news here, and I don't know the veracity of any of that. But that's how I would approach it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
1 minute.
Thank you, Kathy. That's a great question. One thing I'm not sure that a lot of the public is aware of and that the Supreme Court has undertaken is to start business courts. And that's one of the very reasons why the Supreme Court has undertaken that task, is because business courts sometimes face those specialties that is not common in everyday court. And so there was a pilot project that was launched in Jefferson County to assist with that. And it's working successfully now. What I would do, again, is surround myself with professionals who can help me understand, again, the specific technologies at hand and rely on those who are presiding in business courts to help shed some light on those answers.
Our next question comes from Tish Shade. Ms. Shade, this question is going to go to Ms. Goodwine. Ms. Goodwine, you're going to have 1 minute.
Okay. How would you handle disagreements between business and court? Meaning, what are your thoughts on finding a middle ground between enforcing regulations and giving businesses flexibility?
Well, first of all, as a justice on the Kentucky Supreme Court, we're bound to follow the law as it's written, if in fact there's precedent. But as a justice on the Kentucky Supreme Court, we can provide flexibility if we believe that a particular law is no longer being applied or is no longer functional, is no longer practical. Again, that's my practical side of things. So when it comes to business and technology, if there is regulation, for example, that needs to be changed, that perhaps is either confusing or our statutes as written is unclear, then we have to look at as a body how to interpret that. And I think flexibility can come into play there.
Mrs. 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question with it. when we have things where regulations might be conflicting and you have disputes on here, I agree. The Supreme Court is the avenue that can actually provide relief with that. Part of my practice as a partner at Landrum Shouse is actually mediating, and I've negotiated cases since about 2014, actually. So I'm looking at different things in here. What sort of concerns do parties have? What are their needs? This is a lot of hands-on experiences that judges don't get from the bench. The judges will live in a bubble in terms of what they know about a case. If there's a regulation at issue, then the question becomes, because the courts are meant to be the neutrals with the judiciary, is something involved there that would be a separation of powers violation? Is this a regulation that's more addressed by the legislature or an administrative body and whatnot, and then take it from there? So it's not as simple as an open and shut, what do you do with this? But there are lots of things at play, and I think that would be excellent with the Supreme Court.
Our next question comes from Mr. Deppenbrock, and we're going to start with you, Ms. Izzo. We're coming 1 minute, right back to you.
How would you handle cases where state and federal business regulations conflict?
Well, and this is a very good question. It comes up in the cases that I mediate, and often sometimes in the arbitrations as well. What you have to do when you have the regulations at issue, you look to see if there's federal preemption that's going on. Is this something that the feds are looking at as being an overarching and control over the states, or is this something that's been left to the states to decide, and the feds may have their own regulations, but the state ones are the primary concerns? And so a lot of it, one thing that I'm really curious about here, especially you're going to see it with the Title IX issues that have come up in the federal courts, is how is that going to play in with the state level? Because a lot of the regulations that are issued federally are in flux right now. So that's one area of concern. There are certainly many more. I guess that's how I can answer your question. If you've got a follow-up question with more specifics, I'd be more than happy to answer that for you.
Ms. Goodwine?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. How would you handle cases where state and federal business regulations conflict?
Where state and federal business regulations conflict, again, I'd have to look at whether or not there's been federal preemption, whether or not the matter has been left to the states. In a situation where the Supreme Court is faced with this issue and have to make a decision for Kentucky, we will look at what has been done in other states. We will compare what has gone on in other states, how these regulations actually impact the citizens of our state, and what the business leaders are asking us to do, what the effect of that is on their consumers. All of that will be taken into consideration. And then again, comparing what other states are doing, but then decide and determine what is best for Kentuckians.
Next question comes from Ms. Kathy Lindsay, and we're coming back to you, Ms. Goodwine. You have 1 minute.
Ms. Lindsay?
Hi. In disputes between employers and employees, what factors do you think are most important to consider?
In a dispute between an employee and an employer, that could obviously involve several different things, whether it's discrimination, whether it's workers' comp. All of those questions can come up. So depending on what type of case it is, what is important is to look at the what each side is saying, obviously, as the case is presented. And if it's a discrimination case, then looking at whether or not the elements were in fact met. If it's a workers' comp case, then that's another area of law that deals with the rights of the employee as well as the rights of the employer and whether or not those rights have been violated. So I'd have to look at the body of law that applies to the particular case that involves the employer-employee, and did a lot of that as a litigator myself before becoming a judge.
Ms. Izzo, 1 minute.
Yes, well, employment law and wage and hour and workers' compensation, that's my bailiwick. I mean, that is what I've practiced for many years, and I've not come across my opponent in any of those cases, but granted, she practiced years ago before I even had passed the bar, so for those 4.5 years or so. With employment law and a lot of the discrimination, you're dealing with civil rights violations and whatnot. And so you have the question of whether the person who's claiming those rights have been violated is a member of a protected class, how they've been affected by it, if there's been an adverse action taken against them. did the employer know about it? And then you have other things that are taken to play as to whether or not this is a but-for cause or whatnot, where you might see that with age discrimination. Workers' compensation is dealing more with the injury itself. You have other remedies that are not available in workers' comp that are in the employment discrimination area or in wage and hour, whereas workers' compensation is dealing with the injury and the percentage of disability that a person has or their impairment. So you have different rights at issue, and that's what I would look at.
Coming back to the top, we're going to Miss Tish Shade, and this will go to you, Miss Izzo. You'll have 1 minute.
What sets you apart from the other candidate running?
Yes, thank you. It's a wonderful question there. I think the biggest thing that sets me apart is that I'm the only candidate on the ballot that actually has the extensive litigation experience. Kentuckians have required this of their Supreme Court justices, and in fact, everyone that sits on the Supreme Court now litigated for at least 10 years before they ever decided the case. I litigated for 11 years before I decided a case, and I've practiced for 19 now, versus my opponent having just missed the 5-year mark before she went on the bench. This impacts your decision-making ability because, as I said, judges sit in a bubble and only know what the attorneys tell them. So without that real-world experience, they have no ability to really decide the cases and fully grasp what's going on. The other way I can differentiate myself is that I'm the only one who's practiced before the appellate courts. It seems like that would be something basic that you would want, and every Supreme Court justice that sits there has that prior appellate experience. I'm the only one that has that, and as of now, I have at least an 85% success rate on appeal. It's gone up since the race began because I've won 2 more appeals since then. Thank you.
Ms. Goodwine, 1 minute.
I'm the only candidate in this race for the Kentucky Supreme Court who not only has 25 years of judicial experience, but who has ever been a judge. That is very, very important. My skills, my experience, my passion and preparedness prepared me for this position. My opponent talks about appellate advocacy, but I think what's more critical is actually sitting and serving as a judge at the appellate level, rendering those decisions. My success rate on appeal as a judge exceeds 85%. Not only do I meet the minimum qualifications for this position, but I not only have my JD degree, but I have an LLM from Duke University. I received that last May. I graduated, so I continue to educate myself and to advance my skills to ensure that I was prepared for the opportunity when this opportunity became available. What the citizens of this county and this state want is a judge who, again, has been a judge and has the experience that I have, and I'm prepared to continue serving in that capacity. Thank you.
I'll let y'all wrap up your statements, but I'd ask you to pay attention to the timekeepers. I get these text messages from the IT guys, and they're going to throw me out of here if I don't keep it straight. Mr. Deppenbrock, this next question goes to Ms. Goodwine. We have a 1-minute response.
What challenges do you think small businesses face in the legal system, and how would you make sure that their interests are protected by your decisions?
Again, small businesses, one of the things that affect them, just like individuals, is access to justice, is access to the courts. Many small businesses may not have the ability to have in-house counsel or general counsel, may not have the resources to do that, but I think that the justice system should be available to all. I think the access to justice system should be available to all, and I think small businesses should also have access to business courts in the counties in which that's available. But I would certainly ensure that any small business that came before the court would have the same access, the same representation, and the same decision-making as a large corporation.
Yes, could you repeat the question, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
What challenges do you think small businesses face in the legal system, and how would you make sure that their interests are protected in your decisions?
Well, small businesses have a number of issues that present difficulties for them. It could be as simple as finding space to put up their shop, to hang their shingle. It could be finding employees. That's the big thing here, maintaining the wages where it's a living wage and their employees can actually feel like they work. Things that I would do to make sure that these interests are protected is ensuring that the law is applied equally and fairly here. Often you have, especially in the wage and hour, there may be an employee who has caused some damage to some equipment at work, and so the employer's left wondering what to do because they're not allowed to bill it to the employee, so to speak. So these are the sorts of things that I would look at to ensure that the businesses are being protected as well as the employees' rights as well.
Our last question before our closing statements is going to come from Miss Kathy Lindsay. We're going to start that with you, Miss Izzo, and you'll have 1 minute.
Thank you. I believe it was you, Ms. Goodwine, who mentioned it first about being judges being nonpartisan. This race is nonpartisan. How do you deal with that on when you're sitting on the court? Not bringing in partisan politics to it and making a decision.
Ms. Izzo, this is for you.
That's what I was saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you, and thank you for this. I actually am faced with this every day with my arbitrations.
Sure.
One of the things that I do is that I preserve my role as a neutral. It does not matter to me whether someone is right-leaning or left-leaning, whether they've got a lover of dogs and they're all about the Humane Society, for instance, or just their particular issues with it. Because my role as arbitrator is to look at the law and to apply the law to the case, irrespective of these other outside influences, so to speak. It's something that I insist on having before me and keeping that relevant for everyone, because that's the only way to ensure that the public can trust the decisions that I render. And that's something that I will bring with me to the Supreme Court.
Thank you.
Ms. Goodwine, 1 minute.
Thank you, Kathy. One thing that the justices do is serve as a panel. That's something I've done for the last 6 years, is serve on a panel at the Court of Appeals. We serve together. We are Republicans and Democrats together, and we discuss our cases. We discuss them openly. We look at the facts, and we apply the law to those facts. But before we render that decision, we bring in our views, we talk about the case, we talk about the impact of our decision, and doing that as a panel helps us to flesh all of that out. And sometimes we disagree on perhaps a partisan issue, but that we come together and rule on the law. We set all of that aside as a panel. I've had that experience for 6 years in doing that and putting that aside and actually ruling. But for 25 years as a judge, I have been an independent and I've ruled accordingly. I've made sure that justice applied to everyone equally and fairly.
We've now come to a time where we have closing remarks. So we're going to have 2-minute closing statements, and we flip the order. So we're going to start with you, Ms. Goodwine. You have 2 minutes, this camera.
Thank you, JC, and thank you again to the Frankfort Chamber and Plant Board for hosting this forum. Kentuckians need a justice on our highest court that embodies and demonstrates the utmost in honesty, integrity, ethics, work ethic, skills, and experience, as well as a deep understanding of the complexities of the law and a commitment to approaching each case with dedication to the rule of law and justice for all. That is how I have earned my strong reputation during 25 years of dedicated service as a judge, and what I will continue to deliver serving you as a justice on the Kentucky Supreme Court. I am invested in the people and communities I serve, and I humbly ask for your support and your vote to ensure that the Kentucky Supreme Court remains a bastion of justice for all. Upon election to the Kentucky Supreme Court, I will be the first woman and only the 5th person in history to have served at every level of the judiciary in Kentucky. In my 19 years of dedicated service as a trial judge, on district court and circuit court, I have tried all kinds of complex cases. And while on the Kentucky Court of Appeals, I have interpreted complex legal issues, crafted thoughtful, comprehensive, and well-reasoned opinions, and managed a high caseload, all of which have uniquely qualified me to serve as a justice and for justice for all. I humbly ask for your vote, Pamela R. Goodwine, Kentucky Supreme Court, and I would greatly appreciate it if you would please spread the word to your friends and families in my 8 counties that I am the best qualified candidate for this position and the only candidate who has ever been a judge.
Ms. Izzo, 2 minutes, closing remarks.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to reiterate my gratitude to the Frankfort Plant Board, to the Chamber of Commerce and Channel 10 for inviting us here. I firmly believe that Kentuckians want someone who has the litigation experience to actually go on our bench and to decide these cases. And to illustrate this, I must correct my opponent here, and I challenge her to show me the cases where she has been affirmed by the Supreme Court, because by my count as of yesterday, with her decisions that she has written that the Supreme Court has looked at, they have reversed or vacated her decision 54% of the time. And after 25 years of experience, you think that would not be happening. My 19 years of experience as a litigator, I am the only one who has litigated at both the appellate levels, both the Kentucky Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, as well as the federal courts up to the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm the only candidate that has litigated for at least 10 years before actually deciding any cases. I think that I am the better, more comprehensive fit as your Supreme Court Justice, and I welcome your questions. Please come and check out my campaign page. You can get to it on Facebook through Erin Izzo for Kentucky Supreme Court. I welcome your questions and I respond to them. I also ask for your vote this November, and thank you very much.
As we close, I would like to personally thank you both for seeking this office. You've put your name on the ballot, spent your own time and money, skipped out on family events, campaigning, only to serve your state and your community and your district. And I want you to know that it's appreciated. It's a really big deal for us at the Frankfort Plant Board and at the Chamber of Commerce to have candidates such as yourself seeking an office that you're seeking here with us today, and we're humbled that you were able to make time for us. You've both done a great job, and I wish you the best in the election. There have been some election law changes statewide in the last several years, and now there are multiple ways to cast your ballot in this election. Mail-in absentee ballots, in-person early voting before Election Day, which is Thursday, October 31st, Friday, November 1st, and Saturday, November 2nd. There are 3 locations you can cast your ballot early. In-person Election Day, November 5th, 2024. There are 12 polling places in Franklin County. One of the election law changes states that you can vote at any of those polling places. As you know, 2024 is a presidential election year. Statewide, this ballot includes all 6 congressional seats, the entire State House of Representatives, half the Kentucky State Senate, and many jurisdictional elected positions. And voters across the Commonwealth will be deciding on 2 very important constitutional amendments. To say the least, it's an important election. If you don't know where or how to vote, please call the Franklin County Clerk's office at 502-875-8702 and check out their website. It's loaded with current election information. It's been an honor to serve as the MC for this event, and I'd like to thank all the folks that aren't on camera for all their work to make this possible. Thank you for joining us, and this concludes our forum.